Welcome to Mr. Cross's first period class. We're going to be talking about artificial selection today. The cool thing about artificial selection is that it is used in a lot of real-world examples here in our worlds with food and animals and things like that. So it's a really relatable topic and one I'm looking forward to diving in with you today. First off, we need to look at natural selection. Natural selection ultimately is the change in a species over time. Small in the environment, it's usually out of a need and not necessarily, or like artificial selection, it's not necessarily having a human input. So in this example at the bottom right hand corner of your screen is Darwin's finch's example. Obviously his is one of the most famous that helped discover natural selection, but you can see the several different phenotypes that resulted in the natural selection of these finches. So obviously the grub finch here down at the bottom right corner is going to be struggling a little bit in the seeds department if you were in a habitat where there were only seeds. So each one has an advantage in a specific territory, and it kind of happens naturally that way. No one actually interfered with that. That just resulted of generations and generations over time and change. Genes in artificial selection, genes are what are ultimately passing on those traits. And so obviously in artificial selection you only want to pass on the strongest traits, or the ones that are most going to provide that species with the most advantage. So in order to do so, you've got to first select a trait that you want to pass on. So an example would be back to Darwin's finch's idea. If you were trying to pass on the seed beak here, then that's what you need to know. So as you go through generations, you can try to reach that desired trait. It might not happen in the first time. It could take several different generations, maybe 10 or 15 generations, in order for it to actually get there. But you need to know that those genes are ultimately what's going to result in the adaptation. Part of what helps you get the new alleles are random mutations, and those just are a result of breeding and crossbreeding and trying to get your desired result. Those cannot be really interfered with by humans. In sexual reproduction, that's obviously you're going to get a lot of different diversity, just like in humans. No one person in this world is alike. That's because of meiosis and sexual reproduction. It just forms a lot of different new genotypes and alleles that are going to be brand new. So like I said a few minutes ago, it could take several different generations in order to get the result that you actually want. So it's not an overnight thing. Obviously it could happen faster in some cases than the others, just depends on what you're trying to get to. So why would you need artificial selection in this world? Maybe it's dog breeding, maybe it's horse racing, or agriculture. I've got examples of all three and how they are relatable. Horse breeding is a really interesting example because as a huge sports fan, I'm not a huge follower of horse racing, but I love the competition and the way that they use artificial selection in its sport. And so obviously you're talking mathematical figures, speed, size, stamina. What are those traits that make great great horses race so well? So obviously you're going to want a larger horse. If you're a horse breeder, you've got to find the bigger horse that you want to go mate with in order to collect the possibility of those genes. Now obviously thousands of horses are are breeded over the course of a year, but you've got to be really standing out in order to be one of the 20 that are in the Kentucky Derby. So if you don't have the size, the stamina, and all of those genes, then you're probably not going to be there. So things in horse breeding that they look at are previous performances. How did those how did the generations ahead of that specific horse actually perform? How did the mates that and the previous offspring perform? So a lot of different things that you look at, and obviously it's a competition, so you're wanting to be ahead. So if you can master the artificial selection methods, then you have a greater chance, obviously, of winning. Dog breeding is a similar example. A white fox terrier is, as I've learned now, that is the #1 show dog breed over the last while. And so breeding, you're obviously breeding for specific phenotypes. Obviously this dog has particular traits that make it a great show dog, whether it's the size, the shape, the color. I'm not quite sure. I'm not a dog show enthusiast, but I do know that in order to breed this dog, you've got to know what your size and know what your shape and color are, and find the correct mates, and you can create the exact dog that you're looking for, even if it doesn't take the first generation. Lastly, plants and agriculture is a huge one, especially as our population continues to grow. We've got to have more food for more people. So being able to artificially select different foods and create more is a huge for us. And so this picture kind of shows how our everyday vegetables like cabbage, broccoli, kale actually came all from the same primitive cabbage species. So that's a pretty cool thing. So eventually, farmers just found ways to mate these plants into what they are now today. So that's another great use of artificial selection. So now I want you to create your own example of artificial selection and think about how it could be used here in our world. How could something be used in your everyday life through artificial selection? So take just a minute to think of your own example, and then we'll come back and share with the class. So we're back, and of all 25 examples of artificial selection, this was probably my favorite. So if you've ever seen the movie Napoleon Dynamite, it shows a liger. They don't have a whole lot of use in everyday life, but in this example, they're bred for skills in magic. So obviously, if anyone that can do magic is going to be extremely beneficial here on Earth. So hopefully you've learned a little bit more about artificial selection and how it works and what are the positive outcomes from it, and how humans continue to use it for our good. So thanks for listening today. Until next time.